Okay, so that's what the cabinet is. George Washington had 4 advisors, but there's many more now. The president gets to choose his or her cabinet. Sometimes they choose a person who knows the most about the department they'll oversee. Sometimes they choose somebody who gave them money for their campaign. Sometimes they choose their friends or their family or just people that they like, and they give them this really ritzy job. And sometimes then the president will change his mind, and he'll say, "You're out of here, you're fired, I'm going to get somebody else in here." It's a very upsetting thing when they do that, and it's been happening much more often lately. And you can see George Washington had 4 people in his cabinet, but it's gotten much larger. Here are all of the departments that the executive branch is in control of, which includes the Vice President, Secretary of Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing, Transportation, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, the Treasury, the money, Department of Defense, the Attorney General, the Interior, the Agriculture, Commerce, which means buying and selling stuff, and then recently they added Homeland Security. There's a lot of people in that cabinet, but there's a lot more people to govern, so maybe that's just normal. But the cabinet has no power, really. They are just advisors to the president, although they are the bosses of very, very large departments. I mean, if we got 4 million people total, that's a lot, right? And they're serving at the pleasure of the president, which means he can replace them or she can replace them whenever they feel like it. But here's the actual Constitution. And it just pretty much says, yeah, not much. By the advice of blah, 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 judges and all of the officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. And it says the president alone can appoint some people. This is really hard language to read, but we're going to practice it. So that's interesting because the cabinet is so powerful. There's so many people. There's so much money being spent through all those departments. But we're going to go on to enumerated and implied powers of those 3 branches of government. Enumerated means that the power of the government, of the power of that branch, is actually written into the Constitution. It's right there. It says this is what you can do. Implied powers are assumed to be necessary and proper. The necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, gives implied powers to the branches. Because remember, things change, and the framers knew they weren't going to be there for every change, so they had to write stuff into the Constitution that gave the people who are running the country, who are hopefully intelligent people, the power to change things as society changed. So they allowed necessary and proper conclusions to be drawn, and then they could just say, oh, well, I'm pretty sure this is what this means, right? Like, for instance, just recently, El Presidente has decided that we need to have a space force. I don't think George Washington ever thought about a space force, so there's no way he would have written that into the Constitution, right? But because the president is in charge of the armed forces, the president got to create a space force and spend a whole lot more of our money. But what are the enumerated powers in the Constitution? Remember, enumerated means that they're actually listed. They're written. So the next part of this Nearpod has copies of the actual Constitution. You don't need to read the whole thing, but there'll be questions, and the questions state which article and which section define the answer. And the question basically is, what are the powers of the legislature? What can the legislature do? What can the president do? What can the courts do? What can't they do? So you're going to use your study guide, and you're going to list these powers of Congress and the president and the judicial branch. And then you're also going to look for things that are expressly forbidden. Now, I know this language is really hard to read, but we're just going to try and see how well we can do, okay?